Happy Hump Day. Happy New Year.
Hi, yes. Happy New Year again.
Again, yes. So this is the second one of the year,
Yes.
but the first one of the actual year, New Year for us, really. And
Yes.
2024 already.
I know. I know.
I know.
Ah, I want this to be
Actually,
a really good year, Tracy.
me too. Me too. Better than this last year.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what's it like in Italy for New Year? Were you there last time?
No, last time we were here, living here, but
Mm.
went to the UK for New Year's. It's kind of similar.
Mm.
It seems like Christmas is more family stuff, and that's what people tend to do is have their family meals and they spend a lot of time with family and close friends.
Mm-hmm.
And then New Year's is more going out, partying, drinking, eating, celebrating, more with your friends as opposed to, yeah, your family or extended family. So, yeah. We went to a nice party, which was
Mm.
good, met some new people, Italians and other internationals.
Oh,
Yeah, it's good.
oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of food because we all brought food. So there's a lot of eating.
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
Yeah.
drinking. I wasn't drinking, I was driving.
You're so
So,
good. But
yeah,
I don't know, because then it's nice to wake up feeling good.
yeah, it's nice. Yeah, because now when I've had a drink, I just, as you know, can't handle it. So I was feeling quite good about myself on New Year's Day, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah. And how about you?
Yeah. We have to the viewing party. So here we can see Sydney fireworks over the harbour
Yeah,
and the harbour
awesome.
bridge. This is amazing. And I love
Yeah,
the fact that I don't have to go anywhere and I can just
yeah.
stay at home and enjoy
Roll
the
into bed.
show. Yeah, and roll into bed. Literally, that's what I do. So yeah, I had a few people around again, too much food. Too much food.
Mm.
Everybody brought food. I was like, oh, I've got so much food here. Delicious. So what's the first one?
Right. So I have one here. This is a sporting one, and the source is Reuters. And it starts off talking about a New Zealand weightlifter, Laurel Hubbard, who at the 2020 Olympic Games was the first openly transgender woman to compete in the weightlifting sport. And I guess that caused a lot of news at the time. Hubbard actually didn't, perform very well during the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, but I guess that's, the start of the story. And it's talking about how now, 3 years later, there are several different global sporting organizations that have started to introduce eligibility rules regarding transgender women. In particular, we've got the International Weightlifting Federation and also the World Athletic and World Aquatics, International Cycling Union, and the International Cycling Union banned trans women who had gone through male puberty from competing in female category of competitive events. And athletes who do not qualify can enter the newly named men open category. So that's the International Cycling Union. So there's a French sprinter called Halba Diouf and a Welsh cyclist called Emily Bridges, who'd previously were able to compete in the women's category because they met testosterone levels. So that seemed to be like the previous requirement to do a
Mm.
testosterone test. But now the requirement is that anyone going through from, doing a female transgender change mustn't have gone through male puberty.
Mm.
So the World Athletics have tightened their rules. They're saying the only safeguard transgender women have is their right to live as they wish, and we are being refused that, and we are being hounded.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't understand why the rules changed. Like if there was new evidence or I don't know, if loads of transgender were competing, athletes were competing and they were winning everything, or
Yeah.
something. I don't know. Like, what's changed that this is no longer
Maybe
seen to be fair?
maybe the change is that there are more transgender women competing in sports now, as opposed to just participating for fun or, community-based sports. The fact that it's now reaching more of an international level.
Yeah, like the numbers are more.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. There's more events of it happening. So
yeah.
these international bodies are deciding that they need to set up some kind of rules or parameters. I mean, reading the article, the overriding kind of reason being given is that they are wanting to protect the female category of sport,
It's a bit
which,
ironic,
I
isn't
mean,
it? They don't support women's sport generally.
sport normally, yes, normally
Normally,
it's like takes a back seat and doesn't get much, as much attention as male sport, yes.
yeah, or payment or any of those
Yeah, all
things.
of the rest of it, yes.
But now they want to protect it, whoever
But
they
now,
are.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah, they are. Yeah.
interesting,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I mean, it's a difficult, like from a personal perspective, I was thinking, well, if I was a female competitor, then I would want to have a voice in this. It's fine for these international bodies to kind of make these rulings, but
Mm,
surely it should be up to the actual sports women that this is affecting.
yeah.
Yeah, I would think that they should have a bigger, I guess, a bigger voice in it. I
Mm,
did see somewhere here, okay, there's a lady called Rapinoe, and she's kind of been vocal about this issue. She retired from WNBA,
mm.
and they were among 40 professional athletes who signed a letter to the US lawmakers in April opposing a federal bill that stipulates, well, compliance requiring banning transgender athletes from playing women's and girls' sport.
That's
So that's
terrible.
40 professional athletes. I don't know if they're all like WNBA athletes or not. I'm not sure. It doesn't
Mm,
quite say in the article, but you know, they're standing up against it and saying that they don't believe this is the right way to address this particular topic. Those are my thoughts. It should be like the actual athletes that are participating and competing who should have a voice in this.
yeah, I guess I bet there's bound to be some for and some against for sure.
Hmm.
But also, I'm thinking that bill in particular was against any sport, not just professional. So, what are the implications? Because I'm making an assumption here, it's not talked about here, that transgender women aren't allowed to participate in the men's category anyway, if they identify as a woman. So,
Yes,
you
where do they compete?
exactly.
Yeah.
So, then you completely are discriminating against them.
Yeah. I
Um,
suppose, though, looking at it, playing devil's advocate, I guess the reason that they're saying they're wanting to protect the female category of sport is because there is a physical difference between men and women, right? That's
mhm.
why we have these separations of men and women categories in sport and competitive sport in particular. There is a physical difference between men and women. So, yeah, so to allow a fair competition, well, I don't know if that's the original idea, but
Mm,
certainly allows women to be able to compete fairly and not be physically dominated in those sports that where physicality
yeah,
is the main differentiator. So that allows women to compete and be able to compete fairly with other,
yeah.
yeah.
I don't know because I just don't know enough about the science of it. But hasn't there been enough changes? I'm making lots of assumptions that they're taking the hormones, although they've gone through puberty, depending on when they
Mm.
started their transformation. Hasn't their body gone through enough change for them not to have the same kind of advantage as they would if they hadn't done that? Just so it makes sense. I don't know, but I just say I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe that's what's needed, isn't it? Is more science to back up. There is still a fairness there that like you say, enough physical changes and biological chemical changes have occurred for there not to be any advantage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's what's needed. Isn't there one of the sporting agencies that have created another category?
Category. Yeah, that's right. I think that was the cycling.
Right, okay.
Yes, athletes who do not qualify under the new rules can enter the men open category.
Men
Men
open.
slash, yeah, men slash open category.
But why is it men? If
I don't
men's
know. Why didn't they just call it the open
open
category?
category.
I don't know. Oh, anyway. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Tracy, that there just needs to be more science involved in those decisions.
yeah. Rather than
And it must be
speculation.
heartbreaking, it's got to be heartbreaking for transgender, sports people, we know, take professional sports people take, this is a serious thing for them. They dedicate their lives to it. So it must be heartbreaking for these athletes who have really work towards a goal and now they're finding out that they're not going to be eligible for the next Olympic Games.
Mm,
And it seems to me like these international organizations are all like it's a bit of a domino effect now.
yeah. Yeah, we've talked
But
about it
yeah,
in previous episodes. We talked about which one was it? Well, the one that I remember because it's weird is chess, women's chess. So
mm,
they banned women, transgender women from playing the women's chess, and this is part of the problem. They were allowed before, and now they're changing the rules. So I think it's different, just as frustrating, but different if you were never allowed and you're fighting for the
yeah.
rights to do it. But having been allowed, having been participating, having trained and
Right,
dedicated your
yeah,
life,
dedicated, like, yeah,
and then to be told, oh no, we're changing the rules
yeah,
without any good reason. And I know the reason is fairness and the difference in bodies. I don't know how it's different for chess. There's got to be some sports where you don't need that male female differentiation. Chess got to be one of
no.
them, surely.
Well, you'd think so. I didn't even realize it was a sport, but anyway.
I think I watched the Queen's Gambit.
That's I have. But anyway, so you've talked about this before in one of your other episodes,
Yeah, so that
you
was
say.
like season 2, episode 26.
I might
Season
go
2,
back and listen to
episode
that one because it
26.
kind of interests me as to why that would have happened.
And season 2, episode 10, we talked about transgender athletes again.
Mm.
But then, Bhavna, similar to you, she was like, well, I'll try and think of it from this perspective. It was a good think exercise. So, we've got Caitlyn Jenner, who
Mm.
was an Olympic athlete. Were they like a triathlon or decathlon athlete or something like that?
Mm.
Who's changed, is transgender now,
Yeah.
and saying, I'm I'm an athlete, been training all my life, and then I find out that Caitlyn Jenner is going to be joining the female sports category.
Mm.
So that
Yeah.
was their thing, or Bavana's thought experiment. And I totally get that that would feel unfair, but it would feel unfair because Caitlyn Jenner, before she was Caitlyn Jenner, had
Mm.
had had participated as a man at high level
High
competitive
level, yeah.
sport.
Mm.
Whereas I imagine, and I could be completely wrong, that these are people that have transformed at a younger age. I don't know though, and maybe that needs to be the rule. I don't know. Time.
Yeah. Must be really difficult.
Mm.
But it is a shame that they haven't kind of given more notice, like you said, maybe it could be this rule is going to be introduced, a bit of a time period so that at least there's a bit of a chance for people to prepare for that,
Yeah.
and whether that be prepare in terms of, okay, well, this is not going to be the sport for me, or prepare in terms of, standing up for their rights against it.
Mm.
Yeah.
This is the world
Okay.
we live in. Okay, well, another story, because I'm all
Yeah.
about diversity and inclusion.
Yes. It's your thing.
It's my thing. I guess it hasn't been a thing my whole working life. It hasn't, as in it wasn't a term. And I don't even remember when the first time I heard that expression was. It was definitely a HR topic that really maybe became a popular idea in the workforce after the Black Lives Matter movement. But what I've seen as well in the last few years, maybe coming out of COVID or during that time, is a big pushback against it. And what I'm hearing, and my perspective is that people saying that DEI policies are discriminatory against the majority or non-minority, sorry. And their opinion is that you're replacing one discriminatory system with another. That's their argument. But this story is based around America, the US. It's in the business section of The Guardian. And the title of the article is Diversity Policies Face Full-Out Attack in 2024. A leading HR boss warns. So it's the president of one of the largest HR organizations in the country says there's a national shift following George Floyd's 2020 murder is fading. And actually, I didn't even realize that, the DEI stuff was way before then. And that murder happened in 2020 when COVID happened. And now there's a shift, at least in the US. I don't think it's just in the US, but at least in the US, where it's becoming really hot topic, where people are going against it, are going away from it. But even though COVID was one of the biggest magnifiers of the discrimination that existed. And this guy, his name, I don't know if it gives his name. Oh no, it's Johnny C. Taylor Jr. He's the president and chief executive of the Society of Human Resource Management. The national shift to be more inclusive that followed the murder of George Floyd in 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protests that followed is already fading, he says. We're already seeing companies go away from it. Following Floyd's murder and figures that showed how hard communities of colour had been hit by the COVID pandemic, companies across the US pledged to make their workforces more diverse and tackle racism. COVID and the murder of George Floyd kind of shone the spotlight on something that we already knew. And this is what JP Morgan boss Jamie Dimon said during the interview in 2020. He said, we've had racial inequality in this country since way before the Civil War, and we haven't done a particularly good job fixing it. And I guess in the US, it's a bit more, I don't know if it's more prevalent in the US, but just more talked about in the US as one of the developed English-speaking countries.
Well, race is just a really divisive topic, isn't it, in the US because of the history there. So
true.
Maybe that's why. Yeah.
True. Absolutely true. So this Johnny Taylor says that the reset could be as strong as the backlash against the environmental social governance movement, which was critical of the fossil fuel industry, where apparently countries banned big businesses for investing in certain companies. We're seeing this backlash on diversity, equality, and inclusion policies is when you hear big like entrepreneurs like Elon Musk. He's posted on his social media platform X, formerly Twitter, that DEI must die.
DEI must die.
DEI must die. So he tweeted.
He X'd.
He X'd.
Yeah.
And Musk, this is what Elon Musk says, and how I summarized what the mood is. That his point was to end discrimination, not replace it with a different discrimination. And then you also had the US Supreme Court striking down affirmative action in higher education. So these have affirmative action education programs in schools. Yeah, that's kind of been struck down. And that's, well, I guess you call that a conservative movement. And then the American Alliance for Equal Rights, run by the conservative legal activist Edward Bloom, filed a lawsuit over the summer against a venture capitalist firm which focuses on funding companies run by women of color. So yeah, they were going to try and stop them. Interesting. Yeah. And I can see how they're saying, well, if this venture capitalist only funded white men or white people, that would be an uproar. I'm like, yeah, we would. I don't know how it's the same though. It's the same in the behavior, but it isn't the same in the intention and the long
The
term,
intention. Yeah.
and the long term vision of what the bigger picture. And I just
I
think some
think
people are really short sighted.
I think that is spot on exactly what the intention is, right? I totally get when people like Elon Musk saying that we can't end discrimination by introducing a new form of discrimination. I
And you would
understand that.
actually, South Africa. I'm from South Africa.
Exactly. He is South African. So, they had their similar type of affirmative action, positive discrimination, whatever you want to call it, following the apartheid there. So he's definitely coming, I would think he's coming from that perspective, right, where there were specific rules introduced in South Africa to try and rectify some of the damage that had been caused during the apartheid era.
Mm.
So I would say that he has that perspective and lean on it, but certainly the types of affirmative action type policies that were introduced in South Africa are very different to what we're kind of seeing now, where we're
Mm.
talking about equity and giving people better and better access to, what money or power or being white or male might otherwise afford you.
Mm.
I understand that perspective, but I also feel that as a society, there are sometimes things that we need to do in order to make that society better and more equal and fair. I don't think that being white and male means that you should then automatically have access to more.
Mm.
I don't, and yet that is the society that we predominantly live in. I'm not saying that all white males have everything laid out on a plate to them.
Yeah.
But historically, that's kind of the society
Yeah.
that we've been living in.
As a
And it would be
collective, yeah.
nice, yeah, as a collective, it would be nice as a collective if we pulled together and said, well, that's not quite right. Maybe we need to kind of level out the playing field. And therefore, in the end, like you say, long-term vision, in the end, aren't we going to then have a better overall society instead of having parts of our society that are excluded because of how our society has been constructed so far?
Yeah. And the Supreme Court, so this is America again, they're making decisions that make these diversity, DEI as they call it in the US, making
Mm,
these types of policies become almost like not illegal, but challenged. So having quotas and
mm.
things like that would become, yeah, illegal if the Supreme Court continue as they are.
I can see why the quotas can be kind of used against these policies. Like the intention is good,
Mm.
but it's how it's implemented, isn't it? How people in management or positions of decision making, how they
Mm.
then implement that. And quotas can be weaponized, can't it? Just saying if somebody is going to get a job ahead of you because of positive discrimination, then that probably is going to be frustrating. But if
Mm.
it's because they're just better,
Yeah, I know. But this is the thing. I think there's been a lot of mistakes, which
mm,
fuels that idea that it's unfair. And
yeah,
like you said, I know that some of the policies in South Africa were more extreme,
yeah, they were unfair. Yeah.
mm,
Mm,
unfair. I feel like, a pendulum, not a
mm,
pendulum, like if you imagine the scales, they're so far
mm.
this way,
Yes.
there has to be more done to get it and it might even swing too far the other way until it becomes kind of even. And I don't know if anybody's found another way to do it, but that's kind of how things work. And that's the only way you get some sort of equilibrium. Mm.
Yeah, I agree with you. There needs to be kind of a righting of the wrong and then, like you say, in equilibrium.
Mm.
But I do think the DEI policies that companies are introducing, I don't know that they're particularly discriminatory. For instance, my niece is in the UK and she's going to go to university well, this year. So she's been making applications. And I had not realized this, but there are certain universities in the UK that I guess they have DEI type policies. And one of them is that if you're from certain areas, or let's say a postcode in the UK, which is classed as lower socioeconomic, and you're coming from a background that is lower socioeconomic background, then you have the opportunity to get into that university on that course with slightly, not very much lower, but slightly lower grades. The idea is that if you, from that postcode, having gone to a very poorly performing school, if you're able to achieve those grades, what would you have done if you'd have gone to a much better school or had private tuition or had all the privileges that somebody a few kilometers down the road would have had? So they're leveling the playing field in that way.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's I think it's a positive move, because it is saying that if you can achieve that under those circumstances, what could you achieve under much better circumstances?
Yeah. And I
Right?
think that's what equity is about. And you can see how
Yeah.
that could seem unfair as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you really like put your level head on, surely you'd be thinking, yeah, that kid does deserve the opportunity to go to that university because they've proven themselves in what is actually a difficult circumstances. And yeah, but yeah, I mean, those types of policies might seem unfair to some people, but my personal perspective is that, like I said before, we're living in a society where there are some things as a society you need to do to kind of elevate everybody, not just a few, not just a
And
few of the privileged.
I'm going on a tandem here. I'm trying to get in the mind of people that do oppose this kind of initiative. Is it that they don't believe there is such a thing as privilege? Or is it that they believe that's the way the world works? Some people are privileged, some people don't, and that's just tough shit.
Yeah, yeah, probably a little bit of both. I think that there are definitely people who are in a privileged position that won't acknowledge that they are. And like you said, there's people that just like, it's a hard knock life, Tracy. Just deal with it,
Just
deal with your own
deal with
shit,
the
get
cards
on
you
with it.
dealt.
And
Get on with it.
yeah, deal with the cards you're dealt. I've been dealt very nice cards. Thank you very much.
Yeah, deal with cards dealt.
But actually, one of the things that most frustrates me about this, I mean, it makes me annoyed anyway, because like I said, I do really think that if you living as part of community, part of society, you're able to support and help people that are less disadvantaged or that have been deliberately disadvantaged, actually, then, the table should be turned. The thing that most aggravates me about this is that there have been so many laws historically that have been deliberately, not surreptitiously, absolutely 100% deliberately put in place to disadvantage minorities. And yet those laws have stayed in place.
Like what?
And they've been laws. It hasn't just been movements like the DEI thing, these have been laws that have been put in place, like the Jim Crow laws, or the namedly Jim Crow laws back in the US that came into place after slavery was abolished. And then to manage that threat of slavery being abolished, a lot of the southern states created the Jim Crow laws to deliberately discriminate against Black Americans. And yet those laws were in place for decades, and nothing much seemed to happen about them for a very long time. And yet these DEI policies, which have got positive intent, there's like this hammering down on them immediately from, I guess, these conservative groups that have power. So that really actually frustrates me a lot, that it seems like when there's these positive movements, they seem to get ripped away a lot quicker than these very negative, discriminatory laws that get put in place in countries.
Yeah.
like South Africa, like in the US, that nothing seems to happen about them.
No. Yeah, gosh, well, this is why we do this. This is why we have
Yeah,
this
this one really
show.
frustrates me because I just, like you said before, it's really short-sightedness. There's obviously somebody's feeling a threat here and they need to oppose it, but what
Yeah,
is really the threat that they're feeling?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to somebody else about this, and they were telling me, because in Australia you have it's a similar thing with the Indigenous population that have been discriminated against for so long that now they're not thriving in society. Not everyone, generally, 4% of the population. And somebody said to me that they were marking students, and for Indigenous people, they were supposed to, the bar was different, and they didn't agree with that. But you just made me think what you just said. Their circumstances to get even that far, massively different. So, yeah, I don't think, at first I agreed with them. I was like, oh no, this should be on the same, after the same entry or the same pass or the same whatever. But I just think about what, your parenting, where you've had to live, your opportunities to study, your opportunities, access to resources, access to support, and not have any of those things.
Yeah. The challenges that you have to overcome versus somebody that doesn't have those challenges. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to say that people that aren't minorities don't have challenges, but just don't have the same ones and as many often that are systemic in society. It's not just at a particular school, or it's a bit bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I met a really interesting guy on a plane, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, probably. And he was at university and he was blind. And he had this awesome device. And I started chatting to him. And basically, the device automatically, he could I had like a download of a book or a text or whatever it was. And the device would convert it into Braille instantaneously because he
Wow.
was actually reading a book, a fictional book. And I was like, oh, what is that thing? And I started chatting to him and he explained what it was. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he's like, then I realized he was at university and he's studying at university. And he's like, without this, he said it just wouldn't be possible for him to go to any normal university. He'd have to have much greater support in order to make it happen. And then this device, it cost a lot of money and blah, blah, blah. But he was like, oh no, my family didn't have to pay for it. It was paid for by one of the societies that supports blind people. And I just think, well, that in itself there is a DEI type. And, without that, his life would be so completely limited. And yet he's more than capable. He's on a plane by himself. He was living his life. He was going off to meet friends for the weekend. Yeah, and creating a life for himself because of this machine, this device that his family weren't able to afford to buy it, but they receive support in order to do that. So for me, it's like these people that are opposing DEI policies in the workplace or wherever, would they oppose that? Would that be seen as, oh, you're helping somebody, you're giving somebody extra support in order to get them into university?
I don't know. I think some people would still, honestly, but yeah.
They'd
Do
rather
you know
have
what
him
it
sat at
is?
home doing nothing.
It's a support that would benefit them as well. Whereas,
Yeah.
like,
But
if you're not blind, that doesn't mean anything to you to benefit you anyway. But say the example of the grades thing. If you're not working hard enough, that would piss you off. If you weren't thinking about, if you didn't think about the bigger picture. I just think people are very
yeah,
narrow-minded on some of these things. But anyway, I
it
think
is.
move
Move
on.
Okay, so I have a story. Obviously, living in Italy now, I'm getting exposed to other news stories. One of the things that has been quite obvious to me since living here is there's quite a lot of awareness that is being promoted about domestic violence and
Yeah.
intimate partner violence. In Italy, it's particularly violence against women in the home. And there's often, I guess, posters around the place and different kind of events that discuss this topic. But recently, over the course of the last year or so, I'm really pleased to say that Italy have been, and other European countries, it's not just Italy, but there's more of a movement to introduce laws or better laws to help protect women and also to enforce stronger judicial punishments against perpetrators of domestic violence. So this is actually, it's not a news article as such, but it's just a report on a website of one of the law firms that are based out of Milan. And it's talking about the new laws. It's saying women in Italy are tolerating an unacceptable level of domestic violence, which can often lead to tragedy of femicide. Women are nearly always murdered by their partners or former partners. And in an attempt to halt the rising instance of assaults against women by their partners, there's now the drafting of what's called the Codice Rosso or Code Red Law in the hope of stemming the tide of domestic violence. So, as I understand it, the Senate in Italy have voted to pass this bill into law. And I guess it's just going through the process of, making that happen. The new law provides for a significant uplift of sentences that perpetrators of domestic violence against women can now expect to receive. So there's stronger prison sentences and greater provisions for police to act earlier and with more force, I guess, against perpetrators. I also was having a look to see at the types of figures. Shockingly, it was saying that 31% of women aged between 16 to 70 have reported to have faced physical or sexual violence. It's not saying specifically domestic there. I think that's just saying generally, but that's figures from Italy. And I had a look to see what that was in comparison to kind of Europe as a whole. And it's kind of about average, but 31%. That's a crazy amount.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It just is like mind blowing. Like if somebody had asked me the figures before I had looked at, I would have gone, 10, 20% maybe. 31% is really shocking. And on top of that, the number of attacks that end in a death is on average about 2 per week in Italy, which is really high. And obviously, hence why this topic has become a lot more urgent to put in place something that's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
The other nice thing, I mean, it's not a particularly nice topic as a whole anyway, but the other nice thing that I saw was since, this whole bill was passed, there's been an increase in the number of attacks that are actually being reported. So yeah, they're saying that the spike that they're seeing isn't that they believe there's an increase in attacks. They believe there's an increase in confidence amongst the victims to actually report these crimes. So that's a really positive thing. I think even in that alone, if the bill has caused that alone, then that's a really positive outcome.
I'm kind of cynical about that. I'd be more interested in knowing the amount of convictions, if that's going, because it's like the culture in the justice system, that's not going to change like that overnight. So yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, they were kind of saying that some of the reporting process and in terms of the judicial process to get somebody convicted of this type of crime, there still needs to be a lot of improvement in that because it's still exposing victims of these crimes to some, unnecessary part of the process, really. Yeah. But you are right. It's like how many convictions are actually going to go forward. And living in Italy now, there's still a long way for the police to go in terms of general crime anyway. There's a lot of like, kind of attitude unless it's something quite serious. And what I'm hearing as well from Italians here, and I don't know whether it's a misconception that they're conveying, but a lot of Italians are saying there is general corruption. It's a corrupt country,
Mm,
and that includes the police force. So
mm,
there are big crimes that people can get away just because they're powerful or
mm,
because they've got money.
mm.
Yeah. But anyway, I think it's an interesting move. I think it's a good move. And like I said, it's not just Italy, it's other European countries as well that are putting in place new laws.
Wasn't I remember you telling me about this. I don't know if you've said it and
Mm.
I just missed it. But the thing that really struck me was that the idea that easy to kill your wife and divorce her in
It
Italy.
doesn't. Yeah, so we've met well, he's a friend of ours now. And when we came across one of these Codici Rosso, it was like a shrine, really, kind of thing. There were all these ribbons tied around this bridge. And we said, oh, what's this? And he explained, oh, about the domestic violence in Italy and the amount of women that are, it's particularly women that we're talking about here, obviously, but that are killed due to domestic violence. And he said, yeah, in some respects, the law in Italy protects when you're talking about divorce, people
Mm,
separating and divorce, and particularly if there are children involved, the law here protects women
mm,
so that during a divorce or a separation, women with children get the right to the home and la, and men can often be kind of left in term financially,
not great.
yeah, financially, yeah, worse off.
Mm,
So he'd explained that many men think it's an easier way out to kill the wife, go to prison for 10 years, and when they get out, they still have everything that they had before. I mean, I don't know whether he's obviously relaying a bit of a story, I guess, but he
mm,
was painting the picture that perhaps this is why the situation in Italy, 2 women per week are being killed because of domestic violence alone. Perhaps this is the explanation that he was offering. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, that's great. I'm not dissing this move in the right direction, this step
Mm,
forward.
mm,
Longer prison sentences, harsher
mm,
punishments.
mm.
But it's treating the symptoms, not the cause.
Yeah.
Like, it's using the stick and not the carrot. Like, what's
Mm,
the idea that that's okay? Like, it's kind of acceptable. And I was reading something here. This is an Australian government website that talks about the reasons why people don't necessarily get out of those situations, or why people might not want to get involved. Was there anything else you want to talk about before moving to the what would you do?
no, yeah, no, not at all. I just thought that was a kind of a good topic for us just to touch on.
It was like it's always depressing, but always good to know that change
Mm,
is coming, and especially in some of those countries. I think it's definitely something that impacts all countries. I don't know about you, but I have grown up with that in my wider family. I've
mm,
grown up with that and friendships, not in me personally, in my friendship, but my friends' parents and things like that. I've seen it, lived with it. But I'm older, it's like, and you would think this as well, you know, why don't they leave?
mm,
Or sometimes people think the problem will work itself out,
mm.
or it's not easy to know what to do. And people will be reluctant to get involved, even to it.
Yeah, because
Um,
it's still a bit of a taboo topic, isn't it?
and this
Yeah.
idea that you shouldn't get involved in it's a private family matter. Yeah. On the government website, it emphasizes how domestic violence is not just a family problem, it's a crime
Mm,
with serious consequences for your friend. But before I go into all of that, yeah, what would you do now? Who you are now, how old you are
mm,
now, if you knew someone, say you just met a new friend, because you meet new friends, you're at that stage, you're in until you're making new friends, building a life. You've met a new friend, you become really good friends, and you start to suspect that she is a victim of domestic violence.
yeah. It's really hard one. I mean, because I like like you said before, I believe it's a crime. It's not a private matter. It's not something that should be kind of fixed behind closed doors. There's absolutely no reason why somebody that you're in an intimate relationship with should have the right to consider that a private matter. It's a crime.
Mm.
Well, if it's somebody that you've just met, that actually makes it quite hard, because if it's a long-term friend, then you understand what the dynamic is of the relationship a lot better.
Mm.
Yeah, either way, if it's obvious that that is what is happening, I would want to have a conversation, not to hear the gruesome details, but to offer just as what I'm seeing. And I would like you to know that I'm here to help and to offer support. And I believe it is wrong what is happening. And there are ways to change your life and stop this from happening to you again. I personally wouldn't want to interfere any more than that. I don't think, unless I thought it was a very serious situation, depending on the
Life and
severity,
death.
life and death. Well, even, yeah, before life and death, if it was, depending on what type of abuse it was, I wouldn't want to interfere any more than that, because yeah, it would depend on the other person's particular, where they're at. If I felt that they were at a place that they still had it in them to make, decisions about their life, then I would empower them to make those decisions. But if I felt that they'd gone past that point and the mental or physical abuse had taken them a point where they weren't able to make any proper decisions for themselves, then maybe that's when I would have to step in. But yeah, offering support is probably the best I'd be able to do.
Yeah.
And if I
Yeah.
wasn't confident it was happening, I don't know what I would do, actually.
This is the thing, especially if they deny it or justify. Usually justification's more likely than outright denial. But yeah, like I do. And I think about the scenarios I've been kind of experienced, but as a child, I was like growing, teenager, and seeing these things
Yeah.
happening to me. I think about none of the people I know that experienced that. I'm not aware of any intervention by the justice system at all in any of those situations. Just people suffering for a very long time and eventually getting themselves out of that situation. But to me, though, the lucky ones can heal and move forward. But just because you're no longer in that situation doesn't mean to say you're no longer abused in your mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the long-term effects.
The
Yeah.
long-term effects of that. It says that some women take 7 or 8 attempts to leave an abusive partner, which I didn't even know. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. But what I really did want to share, because we're struggling to know what we would do, and it's only theoretical, but
yes,
it'd be useful to know what professionals say. And I'm just going off the New South Wales government website. It was really interesting. You know what I typed in? I typed in, how do I help a friend who's being abused? And it took me to Australian government website that literally took me straight to a survey that was asking me questions about whether these things were happening to me or somebody I knew.
Oh,
So it
okay.
took me.
Yeah.
As I thought was quite interesting. But I wanted to read out the reason why, because people don't just leave. Obviously, it's not that simple at all.
No. Yeah.
And there's so many reasons, like their emotional ties to their partner give them hope that things will change, that it will end, and that's got to be there because you love this person. You wouldn't have got with them if you didn't.
Yeah.
Right. And that the abuse is your fault. And that if you change, then the violence will stop. Or, and this is a lot of women, financial dependence on this partner who controls the money in the family. And you may not be allowed to work. You may be a full-time mother, or worried about where you're going to live, where your children are going to live, how you're going to manage financially. The beliefs that you have committed to the relationship, the belief that marriage is forever, That's definitely not a belief I have. Some people very strongly hold on to that belief. They really believe in sickness and in health and domestic violence. I kind of added that there myself. Sickness, health, and domestic violence. That's actually not funny. It's not funny.
No, it's not funny, but
it's not funny.
Yeah, I understand. The other thing I realize, we've been talking a lot about domestic violence, but obviously abuse comes in lots of different formats, doesn't it?
It does.
And it can be physical and mental, it could be financial, like you said as well. That there's an important distinctions as well.
Yeah, and that whole making you believe less about yourself, really not confident. I'm very wary. I'm almost like very sensitive, and I hear things like, well, anybody doing it it's wrong. Women doing it to other people, men doing it to their partners, it's a big red flag for me. When they joke about your attributes, like, how smart you are not, or the things that you do, and they make it like a jokey thing, where it's really an insult dressed up as a joke. Insults dressed up as jokes.
Yeah, they're always really funny, aren't they?
Yeah.
It is, though. I think that's one of the things that are kind of flags, aren't they? To if you are kind of becoming aware that a friend or family member or whoever might be experiencing some kind of domestic violence or abuse, that is one of the flags, isn't it? The insult dressed up as a joke kind of thing in front of other people, putting something down all the time. Yeah.
And like it's funny. And that's how you joke. That's your relationship. So chips away at people's self-esteem.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen women do it to friends and things as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I probably the whole kind of mental abuse could more than be fair either way. Yeah, it's just that domestic violence is predominantly against women, but
see it all the time.
Other types of abuse are probably either way.
And you made me think of this friend that I met, a new friend I met that had experienced this, wasn't currently experiencing this. Tell me her stories. It was charming and lovely. Nobody knew the years of domestic violence that she'd been suffering. And when she finally reported it and finally started to tell her friends, some of her friends were going over to the partner going, "Oh, are you okay?" They didn't believe her because this partner was so charming, I guess. I don't know how you couldn't believe someone. I just but anyway.
Yeah, because if somebody is coming across as being so charming and wonderful, then it would be really hard for somebody to instantly change their perception or idea about that person. Yeah. And ultimately, even somebody that is a perpetrator of domestic violence, they're probably, good and bad.
That like you going,
like you said before, you've fallen in love with them for a reason. There'll be parts of that person's character that are endearing and lovable and kind and all the rest of it. And that's probably one of the reasons you might be battling as well if you are in that situation, because you might be naturally trying to think about the positives.
Reframing everything or justifying with all the good things. I can totally understand that it's more complex and not as simple as why don't they just leave them? No. Absolutely. Way more
and that complex. Is why we're in the situation that we're in. There's so much domestic violence and femicide. Because if everybody just left the first time it happened,
it wouldn't be a thing, really.
It wouldn't be a thing. Yeah. No. Exactly.
But yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. And then in Australia, the number's 1-800-RESPECT. If you are wanting support, I know if you ring that number, you'll get the national service that will put you in touch with a local shelter, which I think is excellent that we have those kind of services. And to keep in mind some of the things that 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual abuse or both, perpetrated by someone they know. The abuser is the one responsible for the abuse and violence. The victim is not to blame. All women and children and men have the right to live life free from violence and abuse. It doesn't say men, but I put that bit in there. Violence is never acceptable and is never considered a part of anyone's culture. Many women live with violence and abuse for years before telling someone or getting help, because domestic violence follows a cycle. And the risk, and this is where I could come in with my response to that question, and what would you do? The risk of death or injury to a victim is greatest when they're leaving an abusive relationship or shortly thereafter, which I didn't know, but makes sense.
Does make sense, yeah.
That I guess I would be like you. I'd want to empower them. I want to let them know I'd be there for them, support them, and not judge them.
Yes.
For their decision to stay. I'd like to think I'd be that person, but when does it get to, you know, the risk of death and injury, or even the risk to yourself, which is possible in that kind of scenario?
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Actually, Tracy, the more that we've been talking about this topic, the more like crazy flashbacks I'm getting. I hadn't realized how many instances of situations I am actually aware of with friends and family. Like even one time I was sharing a house when I was in my early 20s, and one of the girls, her best friend, was being stalked. And one night, the guy actually, because she was at our house, smashed our front door, the glass of the front door. But it's only when we're talking that I'm like, actually, there's other memories as well, you know, that are coming up. And yeah, we are kind of probably surrounded by it. And these are the things that I know of that have happened to friends and family, let alone things that I'm not even aware of that are going on behind closed doors. Yeah.
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 Well, that's
Big
the
issue.
thing. Big issue. And like when you talk about it now and you do reflect, surrounded by it my whole life. And it's crazy when you think about it. It was kind of, it wasn't norm, but it was acceptable not to take it seriously enough to report to the police or whatever, to get the police involved. But hopefully that idea, you know, that mindset's changed now, that attitude's changed. But yeah, key things to help: approach them respectfully, listen without judging, and support them. Allow her to make her own decisions, help her find support services, help her stay safe, make a safety plan. That's the thing. And there's all these resources on this particular website. I hope in other countries they have similar resources available.
Yeah. Professionals that can help. Yeah. Exactly. With the situation.
Yeah. Professionals that can help. Oh,
okay. Thank you. I've learned a lot there actually, because yeah, knowing what to do in that situation is probably a really important thing. Yeah.
All right, so for that downer of what would you do, but I think it's a really important topic. It's good to talk about.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and like we said, we're surrounded by it. Yeah, it needs to be spoken about more. Yeah, just because the more we all talk about these types of difficult topics, it will mean that victims feel that they have a place for their voice to be heard.
Actually, just made me think, somebody I was working with who was Indigenous, their first romantic relationship was violent. And this person had grown up with it in her family and believed that that was just how relationships were. It had been such the norm in her circumstances that she thought that was normal. And thankfully, she got out of that and into a much more loving relationship. But to think that's normal, that to be your norm.
Well, that's what, you know, these impressions are made at a young age, aren't they? Which I just had a thought. I watched a really awesome TV series recently. This was one of the topics that it covered, and it was based in Australia. It's called The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart.
Oh, I've seen that advertised.
It's really, really good, and it addresses this cycle of domestic violence that can just perpetuate. But yeah, definitely would recommend that as something to watch to get a better understanding and idea of, well, yeah, how victims, and perpetrators, what's happening in that dynamic.
Oh, that's interesting. So what's it called again?
The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. And I think that was on Amazon Prime.
I think I'll go and watch that. Now that
it's really good, really, really good.
Oh, thank you for this week. My new co-host, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I love these talks. They're so good. I'm missing out on this living overseas, and I'm missing out on this really juicy conversations.
Well, there you go. You've got an outlet now.
Yeah, I have.
So I'll speak to you again very soon.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Tracy.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.